Hello and welcome to Tech Deals. Which $110 graphics card should you buy for your Ryzen 3 1200 $110 processor? This video is a test of 9 different games on these two $110 graphics cards in that $110 processor. Ryzen 3 has now launched and it's incredible value for the money. So I want to take a look at what kind of performance you can expect playing 1080p Full HD resolution on a relatively inexpensive graphics card on an amazing value of a CPU there. Now, linked down in the video description below will be my launch review of the Ryzen 3 where I take a look at both Ryzen 3s. I will have upcoming videos showing overclocking and further comparisons of these chips, but for now we're just looking at the $110 Ryzen 3 1200. Now, the CPU is overclocked to 3.8 gigahertz at 1.3 volts on an AMD stock cooler. That's a very conservative voltage setting. It'll be just fine there. I will also have an overclocking video coming up soon with that in more detail. We are running 16 gigabytes of DDR4 2666. Now, I absolutely can run 3200 megahertz RAM, but I understand that people looking for a budget graphics card and a budget CPU may want to spend less on their RAM. So I'm using 2666 today to show you what a little bit less expensive RAM will do. Please note that everyone is guaranteed to get 2666. That's officially supported. The 3200 megahertz is overclocked. So I thought I would show you something a bit different there. The CPU is installed in the Asus B350 Prime $89 motherboard. You do not have to buy an expensive motherboard to overclock your Ryzen processor. Now, I have previously covered both of these graphics cards on my channel and done individual reviews of them, so I won't talk about them here. But I will answer one question that I'm sure is bound to come up, which is why not the 1050 Ti and why not the 4GB version of the RX 560? Simple, they're too expensive right now. On the date that I'm filming this at the end of July 2017, there's currently about a $40 price difference between the 2GB and 4GB cards on the 1050 side and about a $30 price difference on the RX 560 side. It's not worth the money. The kind of games and the detail settings you're going to run at on these cards don't really need 4GB of VRAM. The 2GB is plenty. It is true that the 1050 Ti is about 10% faster than the 1050, but it's not worth a $40 price increase to get 10% more performance. So right now, in July 2017, these two cards for $110 are the deal. Now, if that changes in the future, if the 1050 Ti drops down to $120 or $125, then it's a deal. I would pay no more than $20 price premium for the 4GB versions of these cards over the 2GB versions. Anything more than that, and I don't think it's worth the money. Now, what sorts of games do I recommend these cards for? Principally esports and casual games. Rainbow Six Siege, Overwatch, Dota 2, Counter-Strike Global Offensive, Minecraft, League of Legends. Those games play perfectly on these cards. What about AAA games such as Grand Theft Auto 5, The Division, Ghost Recon Wildlands, and other demanding games? Yes, they will play on these cards, but usually you have to turn the detail down to medium or low. Now that's at 1080p. If you're okay to accept either 720p or 900p, you can often get medium to high in some of those games on these cards, but it's not really what they're designed for. A GTX 1060 or an RX 570 or 580 would be a better choice if those are the games you're mostly interested, but I am going to show you some of those results here in just a minute. What about the cards directly beneath these? For between $70 to $80, there is an RX 550 and a GT 1030. Those cards have half the performance of these. They're not really meant for gaming at all. They'll do it, but they're not meant for it. Those are home theater PC cards and for non-gaming tasks. If you're interested in playing games, these are really the minimum cards that you should be buying new. Game benchmarks are great, and we'll get to those in just a minute, but there are other reasons to choose one card over the other besides just raw performance. Features, application support, monitor support. AMD cards support FreeSync. NVIDIA cards support G-Sync. That's a concern to some people. Some people like to play games that are more AMD optimized or NVIDIA optimized. Some people prefer the AMD driver software over the NVIDIA software or vice versa. And some people simply prefer different brands. Now, many companies such as MSI, Gigabyte, and Asus make both types of cards. Others, such as the two here, EVGA and Sapphire, only make cards from one brand or the other. EVGA is NVIDIA only, and Sapphire is AMD only. So your preferred brand may also play a role. Then there is appearance and fit within your system. Now, these are both single fan cards, but you can find dual fan cards of both versions. Which one fits into your computer is a concern. The other thing you want to keep in mind is whether or not they require a 6-pin PCI Express power connector. Some of these cards do, some don't. This EVGA card, for example, does not. It will basically fit into any computer that you can physically put it into. No special power supply requirements are needed whatsoever. But there are other versions of this from EVGA, such as the For the Win 1050, which do require a 6-pin PCI Express power connector. Likewise, this Sapphire Pulse card does use a 6-pin PCI Express power connector. That does allow it to have a higher factory overclock and potentially more overclock if you wish to tweak the settings. Now, both of these cards today were tested at the out-of-the-box clock speeds. They are both factory overclocked, but I did not overclock them further. You, of course, can certainly do so. Most 1050 and RX 560 cards have the same ports in the back: a dual-link DVI connector, an HDMI 2.0 port which does support 4K at 60 Hz, and a DisplayPort 1.4. Now, while these do support 4K displays, they are of course not 4K gaming graphics cards. But please note that you can absolutely drive a 4K display or a 4K television with these graphics cards and then play your games at 1080p. 1080p is exactly 50% of the horizontal and 50% of the vertical resolution of 4K, so it's half and half. It scales perfectly and it looks gorgeous. There's no jaggies and there's no funny scaling. So if you have a 4K monitor or 4K television but are okay to game at 1080p, these cards will do that very, very well. That's enough of the features in comparison, on to the benchmarks. But before we get there, I would like to remind you that links for all the 1050 and RX 560 cards to both Amazon and Newegg, as well as the Ryzen 3 processors and the RAM and the motherboard used, will all be in the video description below, as I said, to both Amazon and Newegg. If you found this video helpful and useful in any way, please use those links while shopping. I would greatly appreciate it. Now on to the benchmarks. The first game we're looking at today is Rainbow Six Siege. Now, we are running the game's built-in benchmark. Most of these will be, but 3 I'm going to show you live game performance videos. I will show you the individual charts after each game, and at the end of this video will be a chart with all of the averages in a single place. Now, these first few will go very quickly because the built-in benchmarks do not take very long to run. If you want to re-see the real-time numbers that MSI Afterburner is providing, you can see them right there on the screen. While the graphics cards are fully utilized, that's that first percentage on the first line, you will notice that our frame rate is over 100 frames per second. Rainbow Six Siege actually plays very well on modest hardware. It's a beautiful game, but it is not the most commanding game that we're going to test here today. So what do the results look like? Minimum, maximum, and average. The green bars throughout all these tests are going to be the average frame rate. In the built-in benchmarks, the red bars are the minimums and the blue bars are the maximum frame rate. The average frame rate is a little bit higher on the RX 560. However, the maximum frame rate is a little bit higher on the GTX 1050. While 149 frames per second is awesome, the reality is the higher minimums and the higher averages are more useful when playing a game like this than a few more extra maximum frame rate. If you cared about 150 frames per second, you probably aren't looking at a $110 graphics card on a $110 CPU. So Rainbow Six Siege goes by a little bit to the RX 560. The next game on our test bench is Rise of the Tomb Raider, medium detail 1080p. Rise of the Tomb Raider recently got a patch for Ryzen to improve its performance, as well as a DirectX 12 update. If you look at the MSI Afterburner real-time numbers, you will see we are in fact running in DirectX. Several of these games were tested in DirectX 12. Now, I am using the game's built-in benchmark here. I'm not using Fraps in order to benchmark it. So the only thing running on this machine is MSI Afterburner to provide these real-time numbers, and then of course the game itself. All of these games were recorded externally on my Elgato HD60S capture card. They were recorded on a separate computer, so there is no performance loss. The videos that you're watching are the actual benchmarks that you'll see the numbers in each of the charts. Now, when I show you the charts on this, I want you to keep in mind that there are 3 different scenes, and the game provides numbers for each of those scenes and then an average overall. What you're going to be looking at with the numbers here is the minimum from the lowest scene, the maximum from the highest scene, and then the average across all 3 of them as reported by the game. Now, I said earlier in this video that if you want to play AAA games, then really going up a step in graphics card, spending $200 instead of $100 on a graphics card really does get you more performance. But not everybody has that option, and you really can get a lot of performance out of a $110 graphics card. 55 frames per second average on the RX 560, 56 frames per second average on the GTX 1050. The minimums do dip down quite far, however. We are at medium detail. You can set it to low if you want and get those up a bit, although the game's appearance really takes a dive down at low detail. The maximums are of course amazing, but really that's not the playable number. It's the average and the minimums. If you had a RX 570 or 580 in here, or a GTX 1060, these numbers would be improved dramatically. Next up, we have For Honor, also medium detail at 1080p. This game actually was given away with a lot of NVIDIA cards earlier in 2017, and it frankly is an NVIDIA optimized title, which is why you're going to see the frame rates a little bit higher there. In fact, if you watch the real-time numbers here, we're bouncing between 55 and 60 frames per second on the 1050, and we're about 55 frames per second or a bit below that at points on the RX 560. But I would like to make a very important point when going through these benchmarks. The difference of 5 frames per second looks impressive on a benchmark chart. The reality is, if you didn't have a frame rate counter on the screen when you're playing, is there really a difference between 55 frames per second and 60? Maybe, perhaps, I suppose. You could also turn the detail down slightly. In my opinion, the difference of 5 frames per second between one card and another is not a huge difference. Although the RX 560 is in fact slower here because this game really does love NVIDIA cards. Some games are that way, some games like AMD cards, like I was talking about earlier in the video. Take a look at our VRAM usage. We are just under 2 gigabytes of VRAM on both cards. I made some commentary earlier in the video when I said that you really didn't need 4 gigabytes of VRAM. Take a look at our performance. This is why. We have 57 frames per second average on the 560, 65 frames per second average on the 1050. Now, if we turn this game up to high detail or beyond, would you need more than 2 gigs of VRAM? Yes, you would, but then you'd be looking at 30 frames per second. So the card does not have the compute power to use 4 gigs of VRAM, not in AAA gaming titles. I really think 2 gigabytes is the sweet spot for this level of performance. Certainly, if you buy an RX 570 or 580, you'll need 4, but those cards come with 4, so that's what you need. Now we're going to jump to a much older game. This is the 2013 reboot of Tomb Raider. We are running at ultra detail. I said earlier in the video that if you want to play AAA games of 3 years or older, these cards are all you need. These are equivalent to top-end cards, or at least mid-range cards from 3 or 4 years ago. We are running at ultra detail and we are over 60 frames per second. Now it may not hold that throughout the whole game. You might have to turn it down to very high or high instead of ultra. But I'm showing you an older title in these tests to demonstrate if you want to play Black Ops 3 instead of Infinity Warfare, if you want to play Battlefield 3 or Battlefield 4 instead of Battlefield 1, these cards actually will do an excellent job of it. You really don't have to buy the latest and greatest high-end expensive card if you're willing to play games that are just a little bit older. On the plus side, these games can often be had for $5 or $10 or less during Steam sales. Very good value for the money. Let me know in the comment section below if you like seeing older games like the 2013 reboot of Tomb Raider, or whether or not you just want to see current games. 77 frames per second average on the RX 560, 86 frames per second average on the GTX 1050. Again, ultra detail. Even the minimum frame rates were above 60 frames per second on both cards. Just reinforces the point that once you go back a couple years in gaming, even $100 graphics cards will play things very, very nicely. Now that brings us to Mankind Divided, which is the absolute opposite of the 2013 reboot of Tomb Raider. We are playing at low detail. This is the first benchmark I'm showing you at the lowest detail settings that it goes. Now this is at 1080p, and you could get better performance by lowering it to 900p or 720p resolution instead of trying to run at 1080p. Now, if you look at the real-time frame rates, you'll see that both cards are running below 60 frames per second, and they dip well below that in certain circumstances. It's also the built-in benchmark. There's going to be places in this game where it struggles even further. Notice that the built-in benchmark is only using 2 of our processing cores. I'll talk about that more in the Ghost Recon benchmark here in a minute. It's worth noting that built-in benchmarks do not always, but they do sometimes, they don't always reflect the actual performance of the game in terms of CPU usage, memory usage, VRAM usage, etc. And I'm going to show you that later in this video. I'm going to in fact show you several comparisons, some of which show the benchmarks work well and some of which maybe don't. To make a long story short, it really is game specific. Will Mankind Divided really play on a current $110 graphics card? Not really. Do you need more CPU than a Ryzen 3 1200? Not really, actually. This CPU should play this game just fine. A Ryzen 5 1400 would, of course, be a better choice. And in my general advice is if you want to play AAA games, the extra cost, a Ryzen 5 1400 is $159. It's $50 more expensive than the CPU, but it has SMT. It has 8 threads instead of 4. Definitely better for AAA gaming. And that brings us to our benchmark results. The RX 560 averaged 53 frames per second and the GTX 1050 averaged 50 frames per second, a little bit slower. The minimums were the same at 40 and the maximums were a little better on the RX 560. This particular game likes the RX 560, others like the 1050. Frankly, spoiler alert, that's what you're going to see throughout these tests. Some games run 5 or 10 frames per second faster on one card and then it flips with other games. These cards are so close in performance, it really doesn't make a difference. Buy the one that you prefer or that costs less. Next up, we have Farcry Primal. Now, this also is being run at low detail. If you look at the frame rate, you'll see why. I actually tried it at medium, I tried it at high. It really was pretty bad. Please note that HD textures are not loaded for this test. I usually have HD textures turned on for my Farcry Primal runs, but it's too much. So they are turned off. If you've got a $110 card, you don't want the HD texture pack loaded anyway. You're certainly not at low detail. There's no point. We are at 60 frames per second, which is nice. Whether or not you're okay with running it at low detail is entirely a personal choice. While I'm not going to show it to you, I would like to make a point with all the games you're going to see today. If you want to turn the detail up a notch, try turning the resolution down to 720p or 900p. A lot of times lowering the resolution will let you crank the detail up a notch and get similar performance. 63 frames per second average on the 560, 67 frames per second average on the 1050. It's a win for the 1050 by 4 frames per second. Now that leads us to Grand Theft Auto 5. First of all, is Grand Theft Auto 5 playable at high detail at 1080p with full screen anti-aliasing turned on a $110 graphics card? Yes, it is. That's what you're watching here is high detail. Notice I have the screen divided a bit differently. On the top, we have the game's built-in benchmark. On the bottom, we have live gameplay. This is very important. I want you to look at the third line of the MSI Afterburner numbers. I want you to look at the CPU usage during the game's benchmark, not during the loading screen where it's loading. Watch it here. We're at anywhere between 60 to 70% usage on the built-in benchmark. Look at the usage in the live gameplay. It is above 90% usage an awful lot of the time. As we transition to the next scene in the game's built-in benchmark, you'll see that it dips down a bit. Well, okay, the fairgrounds is pretty intensive with the lights and everything. Watch it when the jet's flying. That's where you'll really see the drop. I have been saying this on my channel for a year now that live game performance video is far more reflective of actual game performance than built-in benchmarks are. The truth of the matter is, built-in benchmarks do not represent input lag, CPU latency, AI, collision detection. There's a lot of things that actually don't have to happen for a game's built-in benchmark that do when you're playing. Watch the bottom screens. They were both pegged at 99% CPU usage there. We're still above 90%. There's 97, 98, 99%, 93%. Watch the jet up at the top. Now, there are times where the game's built-in benchmark spikes up, but there's a lot of times where the game's built-in benchmark is noticeably lower than the actual game itself. This is important because not all games that work well with the benchmark are as playable as the benchmark would indicate, and frame rate's not everything. Now, Ghost Recon Wildlands is by far the most dramatic example of this. While the frame rate looks good, the playability is pretty poor on a 4-core chip. Now, that's a subject for a Ryzen review, and I will revisit that on the Ryzen 3 versus Ryzen 5 versus Ryzen 7. What I'm going to do is pick a high-end graphics card, and then I will do a test across all the Ryzen CPUs and show what you get for the money in terms of gaming performance. I'll do non-gaming as well, but that'll be a separate video. So I'll show you, is it really worth a Ryzen 5 1400 over a 1200? Is a 1600 worth it over a 1400? Spoiler alert, if you want to play Ghost Recon Wildlands, if you want to play Mass Effect Andromeda, yes it is. If you've got the money, they really are better choices for long-term gaming. On the other hand, not everybody wants to play every latest game. Not everybody cares about how perfect and smooth it is or how perfectly controllable it is. You just want to play a few games casually every so often without taking it too seriously. I understand. $109 for a Ryzen 3 1200 is an incredible value for the money. I did actually manage to get my live runs. Look at the bottom. I'm in 18-wheeler trucks with trailers. I actually worked really hard this time around to make those runs as close as possible. If you are a longtime fan of my channel, you will have seen Grand Theft Auto 5 live performance videos many times, but it isn't always the same. Sometimes I'm in the city, sometimes I'm in the country, sometimes I'm driving different vehicles. I am making an effort to make my in-game gameplay as close as possible. So I even went to the effort to go steal big rigs at the same point in the benchmark so that you could see it side by side. Okay, they're slightly different big rigs, but I'm in the city, I'm on the highway. It's as close as I can get live gameplay. Now you'll notice at the top that I have recycled the game's built-in benchmark to let you watch it twice while the actual live gameplay is continuing. It makes this video a little bit longer, but that's what timestamps down in the video description or below. You can skip around to the various game performance videos if you want to. You can skip to the end if you want to. But this lets you compare the game's built-in benchmark to multiple scenes of actual live. You see I'm driving downtown around buildings, in the big trucks. It's not perfect, but that's about as close as I could ever get a live gameplay right there, at least without hacking the game, to be sure. That's another consideration. I don't hack the game, I don't use director's mode, I don't pre-stage things, because that isn't necessarily the live game. I do use the cheat codes to give myself invincibility, but I'm not altering the game. If you go into director's mode, if you go in and use cheats and hacks, beyond what's built into the game, you run the risk of representing epic jump in the bottom right hand corner. Seriously, I did that in the other one as well. Wait for it. I even did that was a nasty jump. I may not let this run long enough, but I actually did do that same jump in that same spot with the other big rig. Like I said, I worked really hard to make this match. In any case, I want to show the live game, not a hacked game or not an edited director mode game. So that's why you're seeing me use the cheat codes, but nothing else. Now I'll let this run to the end of the second run of the built-in benchmark at the top, because I do believe you're about to see in the bottom left-hand corner, oh, there we go, another epic jump with the trailer. Come on, that is cool beans. I have to say, Grand Theft Auto 5 is so cool. Oh, did you see the police car bounce off the back end of the train? That was funny. I'm sorry, I just have to laugh at that. And I will not actually get that trailer off there, the truck off there. It's really stuck. I'll get it stuck up on there and then it falls over and then off we go. But in any case, so you can see the difference between the game's built-in benchmark and then the difference between live gameplay. Now it's not terrible here. I mean, there are places where it's close, but the live game can often be more demanding than the built-in benchmark is. Will that show up in the actual benchmark results? Well, I'll show you that here in just a second when the live benchmark finishes up on the top of the screen, but please keep in mind that frame rate is not necessarily playability. How well a game plays versus what frame rate you get does not always match. So here we are at the benchmark charts. Now, the top two numbers are the game's built-in benchmarks, 77 frames per second on the RX 560 versus 89 frames per second on the GTX 1050. The bottom two are the live gameplay. Now those runs went on for much longer than what you're going to see in this video to keep the length down. There's between 10 to 15 minutes on each of those. 75 frames per second on the RX 560 versus 82 frames per second on the 1050. Please note that there is a much smaller gap between live gameplay than the built-in benchmark shows. Many people have commented that Grand Theft Auto 5 is much faster on NVIDIA graphics cards than AMD cards. It is on the game's built-in benchmark, not necessarily live gameplay. And if you watched that and didn't skip ahead to the results, the truck, the city, I worked really hard to make the two gameplays as close as humanly possible. I really do believe that if you put these side by side, it would be indistinguishable in live gameplay if you didn't know which one you were playing. The NVIDIA card is faster, a little bit, a few percentage points, but it's not a huge difference. Buy the card you want and don't worry too much because they're both over 60 frames per second. Now, regarding the Ryzen 3 versus Ryzen 5, does it make a difference? Do you need more than 4 cores? You don't need it in this game. It would help. I will show this game again when I do Ryzen 3 versus Ryzen 5, but I'm not going to talk about that more here. Just look for that in a future video. The next game that I'm going to show you live gameplay next to the built-in benchmark is The Division. The Division is an absolutely gorgeous game, and I have had way too much fun playing it. I am actually surprised, to be honest with you, how little CPU this really does require. Now, in the live gameplay on the bottom, we are playing in the Underground. It's the first downloadable content expansion that you access once you beat the main story, and I've had an absolute blast playing it. Please note that the Underground does not necessarily represent the most difficult portion of this game. That would be the Dark Zone in the center of the map, the PvP content. But I don't play PvP in The Division, so I'm not going to benchmark it, and it would be wildly inconsistent. I really do like benchmarking the Underground because the runs are between 10 and 15 minutes long, and they are extremely repeatable. I have found that the actual performance between various Underground runs to be more repeatable than running around on the surface streets are, because where you are on the map on the surface actually really does impact performance. Whereas the Underground, because it is an auto-generated map from a fixed set of resources, is fairly consistent from run to run. Now, after commenting about the differences between built-in benchmarks and in-game performance videos, I would like to say that the built-in benchmark here actually represents the performance very, very well, at least when it comes to single-player gameplay in situations like the Underground and in the less crowded parts of the cities. Are there places in this game that are slower? Yes, there are. And it's something to consider when you look at the benchmark results that I'll show you in just a second. Don't worry, I'm not going to show you the whole run because the performance is amazingly consistent. Notice that the frame rate is not having huge wild swings. There are dips, but it's not all over the place. The momentary drops when there's an explosion are annoying, but let me assure you, when you look at the benchmark results here, this is completely and totally playable. I have enough time into this game to tell you that at least for the single player, not PvP portion of this game, even with the frame dips that occur, they are momentary, they are not an impediment to controlling the game, and I found it very easy to play. Would I personally play The Division on this hardware? $110 graphics card, $110 CPU? Yes, I would. Now, we're running at medium detail. Very playable. If you want more frame rate, if you want the minimums to be higher, you can always put it on low, although it gets rid of a lot of the pretties. Don't try high. High kills the frame rate really fast on hardware of this level. You'd want to step up the graphics cards just a bit if high is on your list of things to do. The built-in benchmark at the top is still running. I'll go ahead and let this finish before we switch to the results. One quick comment I want to make, some of you are going to notice. The fan speed indicator on the GTX 1050 does not report the RPM, only the percentage. And it's only this card that does it. My other cards do. So that's just an error in the reporting. The 39% and 38% you see on the top and bottom, that's the fan speed of the card. The fan is turning. I assure you the fan is turning. It just doesn't report an actual RPM, whereas the AMD card does. I also commented earlier in this video that neither of these cards are overclocked. They're not. This is exactly the out-of-the-box performance that you'd get. Both of these cards will overclock 5 to 10% more performance. You can get somewhere in the 1400 megahertz range on the AMD card and somewhere in the 18 to 1900 megahertz range on the NVIDIA card if you want to manually overclock them a bit. Now here we are looking at the results. 56 to 52 frames per second on the built-in benchmark, 55 to 54 frames per second average on the actual gameplay. Notice the red and the blue bars. The red bars are the 1% minimum, the blue bars are the 0.1% minimum. These look worse than they are. If you were watching the live gameplay up there, try to find those. They are extremely momentary and very rare. That's why I commented how playable it really was. Benchmark charts do not tell the tale, which is why this video is so long and why the actual game video is in here. Because if you look at these charts, it's too easy to go, ooh, is that playable? It's completely playable. No issues whatsoever. That looks worse than it really is. That leads us to our final game of this video. We have Ghost Recon Wildlands, one of my favorite games of 2017. Now, I've commented this in other videos. I mentioned it in the Ryzen 3 launch review. The built-in benchmark does not necessarily reflect this game as well as it does in others. I really do think the live game performance video shows a truer picture. Now at the low detail that we are running, it's not as bad. When I showed you the game performance videos on the Ryzen 3 launch video, I commented at the time that the game was very rough. Now that was at very high detail with a GTX 1080 Ti, which in fairness, nobody is going to put onto a Ryzen 3 processor, or you certainly shouldn't. If you're thinking of doing that, please don't. When I played this again at low detail, it is better, but it still stutters a lot. There's a lot of places in the game where the input lag is just dreadful. That's the 4-core, 4-thread Ryzen chip at work there. Please note that we are running overclock to 3.8 gigahertz. That's not the problem. The lack of threads is the problem. Now, if you look at the real-time performance at the bottom, you'll say, but we're not pegged at 99%. No, we're not, and that's just a thing. It doesn't always go up to 100% even when the CPU is fully busy. You can either take my word for it or not, but let me tell you, the input lag is real on a 4-thread chip. To be completely honest, I don't recommend Ghost Recon Wildlands on 4-thread chips. That would include i5s, that would include the Ryzen 3s. Now, Ryzen 5s, the Ryzen 5 1400 is an 8-thread chip, and it does play better. The i7, any of the i7 chips, even a 5-year-old i7 will play this much better than the i5s will. And I am speaking from experience there because I did play this and I did test this on the Ryzen 5 1400 and the Ryzen 5 1500X for the Ryzen 3 launch review. Much better, much smoother. Same graphics card, same detail settings. The experience was a much more pleasant experience, but it doesn't show up in the benchmark charts. If you looked at the benchmark charts of my Ryzen 3 launch video, it's very easy to go, what in the world? It looks okay. The frame rate looks fine. Why is there a problem? There is. There really, really is. So, if you want to play AAA games into 2017, 2018, 2019, if you're buying a CPU today to last you 3 years, I really think a Ryzen 5 1400 is the minimum you should buy. You can get away with a Ryzen 3 1200. I understand some people are on very tight budgets, and the benefit of the AM4 platform is that future upgradability. AMD has promised to keep the AM4 socket and the motherboards for 4 years. So through 2020, through a whole upgrade cycle, you could buy a Ryzen 3 1200 and live with it for now. Play the games, maybe play older games, or just accept the performance, use it for a year or two, and then be ready to upgrade. Intel tends to change their sockets on their motherboards every other year. If you were to buy an i5 today, you can't upgrade just the CPU in 2 years. You have to replace the entire motherboard. With Ryzen, you don't. You'll be able to upgrade to Zen 2 or Zen 3. AMD is working on the next generation already. This isn't a secret. I mean, that they've talked about that. It's worth considering that is definitely an advantage of the Ryzen platform. Now, if you're worried about whether that will come true, I would like to point out that AMD kept their AM3 socket, the one before AM4, for more than 4 years. They have a track record going back more than 10 years of keeping their sockets through many generations, not just 2 like Intel does. So if you can't afford a faster CPU, fear not. Wait a couple of years, you'll be able to buy the next generation of Ryzen chips, drop it into your AM4 motherboard, and get awesome new performance without having to change your whole computer. Now, one more quick note regarding Ghost Recon Wildlands. You notice that we're playing at low detail. If you want to see what this looks like played on Ryzen processors at a higher quality setting, go watch my Ryzen 3 launch video, which is down in the description below. That contains Ghost Recon with very high detail set on a GTX 1080 Ti. Again, don't put that graphics card in here, but you could do a GTX 1060 or RX 580, both excellent cards. I've tested them both in Ghost Recon Wildlands in the past on my channel. Now, not on a Ryzen 3. I will, when the RX 580 is coming back for normal stock, I will come back and retest all of these games with an RX 580 versus the GTX 1060. And here you can see the benchmarks. The top 2 lines again are the game's built-in benchmark, 57 frames per second and 65 respectively. Looks great, doesn't it? Even the live gameplay looks great, 60 and 63 frames per second respectively. And even the minimums aren't too bad, 45 and 48 on the 1% minimum and 38 and 34 on the 0.1% minimum. That being said, it's not the frame rate that's the issue with this game, it's the input lag. When you try to drive, when you try to turn your vehicle, there's an ever so slight delay between when you press the keys and when stuff happens. That delay does not exist on the Ryzen 5 1400 and 1500X, and it does not show up in the benchmark charts. I've actually racked my brain how to show that in a video because it's something you really only experience when you're playing the game, but I can absolutely feel a difference between playing between the Ryzen 3 and Ryzen 5. That, by the way, is not true on The Division and Grand Theft Auto 5. Both of those were completely controllable on the Ryzen 3 chip. It's really a Ghost Recon Wildlands thing. This is why I believe if you're buying a processor for the next 3 years, it's an issue. If you're only buying a processor to play today's game, Ryzen 3 is great. It'll play everything maybe except for this one just fine. But if you're buying a chip to last you 3 years, this will be a growing problem as games simply require more into 2018 and 2019. The best deal long term is probably the Ryzen 5 1600, but that's a topic for the Ryzen overview. Now here are all the averages on the two cards in all 9 games that I'm showing you. Now all the averages for the 3 games that I showed you live gameplay are from the game's built-in benchmark just to keep things even. This way you don't have to scroll through the video to see what the average frame rate was between the cards. You can see them all in one place. The only real problem game in this list, besides the comments I made on Ghost Recon, is Mankind Divided, because that's at low detail and it can't go any lower. Rise of the Tomb Raider and The Division were both at medium detail. Those could be turned down. Please note that you don't have to use presets. You can manually adjust them. Turn 1 or 2 of the detail settings down rather than using presets. Those have room for adjustment, but Mankind Divided was already at low. Everything else you can find something that's playable at on a $110 card. And so there you have it, 9 games tested on these 2 cards. Out of all of that, do we have a solid conclusion? Is one of these cards absolutely better than the other? Not really. Same price and roughly the same performance. There are, as you saw, games where the 1050 is faster, but there's games where the RX 560 is faster. And where you live, or based upon mail-in rebate sales or discounts, one of these cards may be a little bit less expensive and it might be the one you want to go with. The truth of the matter is they are so close in performance that if you were to set up 2 identical computers, one with each of these cards, not tell the person using it which one they're using and ask them to pick out the faster machine, it would be very hard to tell in day-to-day use. They're both excellent cards, and I'm glad that we have this competition from AMD and NVIDIA to bring us this great performance. Like this video if you like it, share it with your friends if you loved it. Remember to subscribe to my channel with the big huge red button directly below this video. Questions and comments in the comment section, and as always, the links in the video description